Picture every human being alive on Earth right now. 8 billion people. Every face you've ever known. Every stranger you've ever passed on the street. Now picture all of that, every single one of us, fitting inside one crater in Mexico. Because that's roughly the size of the scar left behind by the event that almost erased everything that would ever become you. 66 million years before your first ancestor ever took a breath, something slammed into this planet hard enough to end an entire age of life on Earth. 3 out of every 4 species alive at the time never saw what came next. And somehow, something did. So what was small enough, quiet enough, and lucky enough to survive the single worst day life on Earth has ever recorded? The creatures living through what was about to happen didn't look anything like you. Not even close. But somewhere inside them was a thread of biology that had already been running for over 100 million years, one that eventually, after a chain of accidents longer than you can really picture, becomes you. Same warm blood. Same need to eat before the day is over. Same instinct to freeze, or bolt, or hide, the moment the world stops feeling safe. For almost the entire history of life on land, these particular creatures had lived in the shadows. Literally. Most were about the size of a rat. Some were smaller than your thumb. They came out mostly at night, ate insects and seeds and whatever scraps were left behind, and stayed as far away as possible from anything with teeth the size of a kitchen knife. Because the things with teeth like that ruled everything. For more than 150 million years, they owned every forest, every coastline, every open plain on the planet. Nothing challenged them. Nothing ever had. Some of these small creatures dug. Some climbed. Some simply learned to be quiet enough not to matter to anything that could kill them in one bite. Scientists split them into a handful of different family lines with names almost nobody outside a museum has ever heard, but all you really need to know is this: none of them had ever, in over 100 million years, gotten the chance to be anything more than background noise. It wasn't a glamorous existence, but it was about to become the only one that counted. Then, one afternoon, a detail arrived from space that none of them saw coming. Millions of years later, a thin gray layer of clay would show up in rock formations on nearly every continent on Earth, a layer that would end up explaining more about your existence than almost anything else in the fossil record. But here's what almost nobody talks about. It wasn't just the impact. What came after the impact was, in some ways, worse. 66 million years ago. The Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico. An object roughly 6 miles wide at about the length of Manhattan Island, end to end, came in at more than 40,000 miles an hour and hit shallow ocean water like it was concrete. Here's the part that explains why you're sitting here today. The impact released energy equal to billions of atomic bombs, all at once, from a single point on the map. If that same force landed on the continental United States, the shockwave alone would level forest cover from coast to coast in a matter of minutes. But the blast wasn't the real killer. The debris was. Trillions of tons of vaporized rock shot straight up out of the atmosphere, then rained back down across the entire globe as white-hot fragments. For hours, the sky over every continent may have glowed like the inside of a furnace, hot enough, in places, to ignite wildfires thousands of miles from the impact site. At the same time, a wall of ocean water taller than most buildings raced outward across the Gulf, and the ground itself shook with the force of the largest earthquakes ever recorded on this planet. In the oceans, entire groups of animals that had thrived for over 100 million years, coiled-shelled swimmers the size of car tires, massive marine reptiles longer than a school bus, vanished from the fossil record almost entirely. Charcoal layers found around the world suggest wildfires burned across huge stretches of the planet within days of impact. Then came the part that lasted. Soot and dust blocked out the sun for months, maybe longer. Scientists are still narrowing down exactly how long, but the outcome was the same either way. Photosynthesis collapsed. Plants died first. Then the animals that ate plants. Then the animals that ate those animals. The plants aren't growing back yet. The sunlight hasn't returned. Somewhere, underground, something small is still breathing. Geophysicists first stumbled onto the crater itself back in 1978, while searching for oil off the coast of Mexico, without realizing what they'd actually found. It took another decade before anyone connected it to the layer of clay. Because in 1980, geologist Walter Alvarez and his father, physicist Luis Alvarez, found the fingerprint of this exact moment, that same thin layer of clay, in Italy, packed with iridium, an element that's rare on Earth's surface but common in asteroids. The same layer, it turned out, exists almost everywhere on the planet. 3 out of every 4 species on Earth were gone within what is, geologically speaking, the blink of an eye. But a small group did survive. Against all of it. And when scientists finally figured out how, it changed what we thought we understood about survival itself. So what let anything make it through the worst single-day life on Earth has ever recorded? Not size. Not strength. Not speed. The opposite. Almost every animal that survived the extinction was small. Most weighed less than a house cat. A lot of them were smaller than a squirrel. It sounds almost too simple, right? Here's why it wasn't. Being small meant needing far less food in a world where food had almost disappeared overnight. Being small meant fitting into burrows underground, insulated from a sky that had turned first to fire and then to darkness. Being small meant surviving on insects, seeds, and leftover scraps instead of the enormous daily meals a full-grown dinosaur needed just to stay alive. Paleontologists have actually found the burrows themselves, preserved in rock layers right at the boundary, tunnels dug straight down into the earth, right when the world above ground had stopped being survivable. There's a second piece, and it matters just as much. These survivors were generalists,
the last of his kind,
active mostly at night, willing to eat almost anything they came across, built for uncertainty instead of one perfect food source. Paleontologist Gregory Wilson Montilla, at the University of Washington, has spent years studying how mammal teeth changed in the immediate aftermath of the extinction, and the pattern holds up again and again. The animals that made it through weren't the strongest. They were the least picky. The dinosaurs that weren't birds never got that option. They were too big, too specialized, too dependent on an ecosystem that had just been erased in an afternoon. But wait, didn't some dinosaurs survive too? They did. The feathered ones. The ones small enough and generalist enough to slip through that same narrow window as the mammals. We just call them something else today. We call them birds. The small, unglamorous mammals hiding in the dark got that same option. And with the largest predators on the planet suddenly gone, something happened that hadn't happened in over 150 million years. Mammals got room to grow. Researchers at the University of Edinburgh have traced just how fast that happened. Within roughly 10 million years, some mammal lineages had already grown dozens of times larger than their extinction-era ancestors. One early descendant went from something you could hold in your palm to something the size of a large dog, in a fraction of the time evolution usually takes to do anything at all. Bigger bodies. Bigger brains. Entirely new places to live, opening up across an empty planet, one generation at a time, until, eventually, one branch of that family tree became curious enough to ask questions about its own existence. That's not a metaphor. That's biology. Every person you know. Every person you've ever passed on a street. Every athlete. Every musician. Every scientist. Every child. Every single one of them traces their existence back through an unbroken chain of survival that starts with a small, frightened creature hiding in the dark, 66 million years ago. If that chain breaks even once anywhere, at any point, you never exist. I never exist. History never happens. And here's the fact that should stop you cold. The same event that ended the age of dinosaurs is the only reason mammals were ever given the opening to become anything bigger than a badger. It's easy to look at modern life, cities, language, everything you've ever known, and assume it was always going to turn out this way. It wasn't. For over 150 million years, the entire future of intelligent life on this planet was boxed into bodies the size of a mouse, waiting on a chance that had close to zero odds of ever arriving. The impact didn't just end an age. It opened one. But the day the sky caught fire was only round one. Because what the survivors crawled out into next was colder, hungrier, and lasted far longer than a single afternoon of fire. That's the next episode.